Between 1914 and 1918, British and American field surgeons documented a plant closing infected wounds in 72 hours without antibiotics. 40 separate conditions, 14 field hospitals, all recorded in military medical archives that still exist today. In 1989, the FDA made it illegal to sell this plant with any medical claim attached. The pharmaceutical industry reported record profits the same year. This is not a fringe story. This is a paper trail. The plant is Comfrey, Symphytum officinale, a coarse, bristly herb with broad leaves and small bell-shaped flowers, purple, white, and pink, that has been growing in disturbed soils, riverbanks, and the edges of fields across Europe and North America for as long as anyone has written anything down. It does not look like medicine. It looks like a weed. That is, in fact, the point. The compound that made Comfrey legendary is called Allantoin. It is a nitrogen-rich molecule produced in Comfrey's leaves in concentrations that range from 0.6 to 1.35% of dry weight. Allantoin does one thing exceptionally well. It accelerates cell proliferation. It signals the body to generate new tissue at a measurably faster rate. Multiple clinical trials have confirmed this mechanism. It is not folk belief. It is documented biochemistry. The second major compound is rosmarinic acid, a polyphenol with anti-inflammatory properties studied extensively in the early 2000s. A 2004 research review from the University of Maryland placed rosmarinic acid's anti-inflammatory effect as comparable to ibuprofen in topical applications, working through the inhibition of the same inflammatory cascade that NSAIDs target chemically. Same biological mechanism. Plant origin. No patent. There is a third compound, and this is where the regulatory story becomes complicated. The roots of Comfrey contain pyrrolizidine alkaloids, a class of chemicals that, in concentrated doses, can cause veno-occlusive liver disease. This is a real risk. It is also a deeply misrepresented one. The studies that established Comfrey's danger in the 1980s used root extract, not leaf preparation, at dosages roughly 100 times higher than any traditional medicinal use. Leaf preparations, which are what field surgeons used, what herbalists prescribed, and what home medicine relied on for centuries, contain pyrrolizidine alkaloids at concentrations 40 times below the threshold that produces measurable harm. That distinction, root versus leaf, toxic dose versus traditional dose, was present in the scientific literature. It was not prominently featured in the regulatory conclusions. One more fact about Comfrey before we continue. Once it establishes in soil, it cannot be removed without total excavation. The roots grow deep, branch extensively, and any fragment left behind regenerates. You can cut it, dig it, poison it, and it returns. A plant that is also medicine, that spreads without permission, that cannot be eradicated, is a particular kind of problem for industries built on scarcity. The first written record of Comfrey as medicine comes from Pedanius Dioscorides, a Greek physician who served in the Roman army under Emperor Nero. Around 50, he compiled De Materia Medica, the foundational pharmacological text of the ancient world, referenced by physicians for 1,500 years. Dioscorides documented Comfrey for wound closure and bone healing. The Greek name he used, symphyton, means that which grows together. The name was chosen deliberately. It described what the plant did. That reputation did not fade. It accumulated evidence across centuries. By the medieval period, Comfrey was known throughout Europe as knitbone and boneset, vernacular names that reflected observed clinical outcomes, not poetry. Healers documented it for fractures, sprains, open wounds, and skin conditions. It appeared in English herbals by the 12th century. By the 16th, it was standard in European apothecary practice. Then came the wars, and the documentation became formal. During the Napoleonic Wars, military surgeons used Comfrey poultices as a primary wound treatment in field conditions where infection was the primary cause of death. The practice was not improvised. Desperation. It was inherited from established medical tradition and continued because it produced observable results in conditions where the margin for ineffective treatment was zero. By the First World War, the practice had been institutionalized. The British Royal Army Medical Corps Field Manual of 1915 explicitly lists Comfrey poultice as a primary wound closure method, one of the tools field surgeons could rely on when pharmaceutical supply lines were disrupted and infected wounds required immediate intervention. American military hospitals operating in France from 1917 to 1918 produced at least 14 documented field hospital records that reference Comfrey preparation for wound treatment. These records exist. They are not legend. They are archived military medical documentation from a period when medicine was practiced under extreme constraint and every tool was evaluated on a single criterion: does it work? The answer, across 1,800 years of written record before any regulatory agency existed to form an opinion, was consistently yes. Through the 19th century and into the 20th, Comfrey maintained a quiet but stable presence in American domestic life. Seed catalogs published through the 1950s listed it routinely under household medicinal herbs. Home remedy books included it alongside plantain, yarrow, and elderberry. It was not exotic knowledge. It was ordinary household inheritance, passed from garden to garden, generation to generation, because it consistently performed. That ordinary presence was about to become a problem. In 1985, the FDA began a review of pyrrolizidine alkaloids, a broad chemical class found across dozens of plant species, including coltsfoot, borage, and comfrey. The review was scientifically legitimate in its original scope. Certain pyrrolizidine alkaloids in certain concentrations do cause liver damage. That is documented and real. But what happened next requires careful examination. The studies that formed the foundation of Comfrey's regulatory fate were conducted using concentrated root extract, the highest possible alkaloid dose, administered to rats at quantities far exceeding any traditional use. In one widely cited study, the equivalent human dose would have required consuming several pounds of raw root daily for months. The results, predictably, showed liver toxicity. These results were then applied to all Comfrey preparations, including leaf-based topical applications with alkaloid concentrations a fraction of those tested. The distinction between root and leaf, and between internal and topical use, was acknowledged in the scientific literature. It did not meaningfully alter the regulatory response. In 1989, the FDA moved to ban medicinal claims for Comfrey products. No dosage distinction, no preparation distinction. Any product marketed for a health purpose had to remove the claim or leave the market. The enforcement was categorical. The timing is worth examining. Ibuprofen's original patents were expiring in the late 1980s, opening the NSAID market to generic competition and creating intense commercial pressure to establish market dominance in anti-inflammatory products. Comfrey's Rosmarinic Acid works through the same anti-inflammatory pathway, COX enzyme inhibition, that ibuprofen targets. A freely available garden-grown plant that performed comparably to NSAIDs topically was not a neutral competitive presence. The anti-inflammatory market was worth billions. It is worth approximately $18 billion today. That same year, the wound care market, the other domain where Comfrey's Allantoin showed documented clinical efficacy, was growing rapidly. The industry solution was elegant. Synthesize Allantoin, patent the synthesis process and delivery mechanism, and sell the compound at scale without the plant it came from. Today, Allantoin appears as an active ingredient in dozens of commercial wound care and skin repair products. The global wound care market is currently valued at $22 billion annually. The compound is the same one Comfrey produces. The plant that produces it is illegal to sell medicinally. American consumers spend an average of $340 per year on NSAIDs, Ibuprofen, naproxen, diclofenac for the kinds of inflammation, joint pain, soft tissue injury, and skin conditions that Comfrey leaf preparations address topically. That figure comes from pharmaceutical retail tracking data and does not include prescription anti-inflammatory drugs. Because the molecule is public domain, the industry must patent everything surrounding it: the synthesis process, the delivery mechanism, the formulation. The plant that produces it freely cannot be owned, so it was made unsellable instead. A plant that cannot be acquired, licensed, or priced can only be legally marginalized. That is what happened. Comfrey did not disappear. It grows wild across the entire northeastern United States: roadsides, stream banks, old farm fields, disturbed ground. It is not a rarity. It is common. Most people who live within a mile of it have walked past it without knowing what they were looking at. In all 50 states, Comfrey is legal to purchase, grow, and possess. It is sold in herb nurseries and garden centers as an ornamental plant. The legal designation is ornamental. The plant is identical to the one in the field hospital records. Meanwhile, the regulatory divergence that played out in 1989 produced a sharp geographic split that still holds today. Germany's Commission E, the European equivalent of the FDA, composed of physicians, pharmacologists, and toxicologists, evaluated the same evidence and reached a different conclusion. Commission E approved topical Comfrey preparations with clear dosage and preparation guidelines, a position the broader European Union has maintained. European pharmacies stock standardized Comfrey extract as a labeled, dosed, approved pharmaceutical preparation, not an underground health product, not a gray market supplement, a shelf medicine openly sold for the same conditions the FDA said could not be claimed. The science did not change depending on which side of the Atlantic it was evaluated. The regulatory outcome did. Herb societies in North America maintain extensive seed banks. Permaculture communities have kept Comfrey in continuous cultivation for decades, partly for its documented function as a nutrient accumulator. Its deep roots mine minerals from subsoil layers and deposit them in leaves that compost into exceptionally rich mulch. It is valued in those communities as both a soil tool and, with appropriate preparation knowledge, a medicinal plant used externally. The knowledge did not go away. It just moved to the edges of official systems. Comfrey is legal to grow everywhere in the United States. Nurseries like Horizon Herbs and Richter's Herbs carry multiple named varieties, including Bocking 14, a cultivar selected for high allantoin content and lower alkaloid levels in the leaf than wild-type plants. Once planted, it is self-sustaining, a permanent resource that returns every spring without replanting, without fertilizer, without intervention. The traditional preparation is external: leaf poultice, fresh leaves bruised and applied directly to the skin, or a simple infused oil made from dried leaves in a carrier oil base. Not root extract, not internal use. The traditional preparation that field surgeons used, that Dioscorides documented, that 1,800 years of written medical record reflects, was topical and leaf-based. That preparation distinction is not a minor footnote. It is the entire story of what was misrepresented when this plant was regulated out of its historical role. Learn to identify it. Broad, lance-shaped leaves with a rough, bristly texture, hollow stems, bell-shaped flowers in pink, purple, or white clusters that droop at the tip. A distinctive smell, faintly green, slightly earthy. Once you know it, you will begin to see it in places you have walked past for years. Field surgeons. Between 1914 and 1918, used Comfrey when pharmaceutical supply lines broke down and soldiers were developing infections that should have been fatal. The wounds closed. The soldiers survived. The records documenting this are in military archives. 70 years later, the active compound responsible for that wound closure, Allantoin, was synthesized, reformulated, patented in delivery systems, and sold back to the public at scale as part of a $22 billion annual market. The plant that produces it naturally was quietly stripped of its medicinal identity. The compound did not change. The wound healing mechanism did not change. The 1,800-year clinical record did not change. Only who profits from it did. The plant is still growing. In fields, along roads, in gardens where someone planted it once and never had to plant it again. It has not gone anywhere. Most people just stopped knowing what they were looking at. Outro. We've been taught that the only things that can save us are the things we can buy. We see a $22 billion industry and we call it advanced medicine. But we see a plant growing in a roadside ditch and we call it a nuisance. But biology doesn't care about branding. The Allantoin in a $40 tube of synthetic cream is the exact same molecule that's currently pushing through the soil in your backyard. The only real difference is that one requires a patent, a supply chain, and a credit card, while the other just requires you to recognize it. The archives didn't go away. The chemistry didn't change. They didn't have to burn the books to get rid of this knowledge. They just had to change the definitions. By moving the goalposts from medicine to ornamental, the system created a reality where abundance is a problem to be managed rather than a resource to be shared. The history of medicine isn't just a story of discovery. It's a story of what we were told to forget. Next time you're outside, look closer at the weeds. You might realize you've been walking past a pharmacy your entire life. You don't need a patent to grow it, and you don't need a permit to remember how to use it. The plants are still here. They're just waiting for us to see them again. The history is yours to reclaim. If this changed the way you look at the world under your feet, share this with someone who still thinks the truth only lives on a pharmacy shelf. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.